Hi, everyone. Welcome to Making the Grade on this Tuesday morning. I'm Michelle Edmonds with Idaho News 6. Such a pleasure to be with you live on Facebook. As always, we would like to take your comments, your questions, your concerns, your thoughts, your feelings, perhaps, about education and where we are in the state of Idaho right now, particularly in the midst of this pandemic. Joining me for Making the Grade, as he always does, Kevin Richert from Idaho Education News. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Hi, Michelle. How you doing?
Good, good. Managing, as hybrid models
Yeah.
continue throughout a lot of the state with education. We'd love to hear from parents about how things are going with at-home learning or sending their kids off to school. In fact, I just saw it, and you probably did, Kevin, too, that the Board of Trustees in Caldwell has approved going back to a hybrid model. So once again, Idaho Education News will have to update their map of what school districts are doing.
It's changing in real time, and we're chasing openings, we're chasing closings. It's all over the place right now, and I think it's going to be an ongoing story for us, trying to keep track of who's open and who's closed.
Kevin, something you've been doing literally since March is keeping this kind of coronavirus trend line. And of course, the reason you're doing this as a journalist is because these numbers tie directly to what's happening with schools either being opened or closed, as you mentioned. So let's take a look at your latest trend line, because not only do you follow the number of cases as it's put out, and we're seeing here on the graph, but you take these directly to its impact on education. So tell us a little bit about what we've been seeing in this last week.
Yeah, what I've been trying to do really these past 6 months, and the graphic shows it, is looking at the new cases each week. And well, no surprise, as you've been watching this story unfold this summer, the new case numbers exploded through the summer, through June and July and August, where we see those really tall red lines. We saw a decline, and a pretty significant decline in August and into early September. But what I noticed this past week was an uptick in cases just in the past week, numbers creeping back up to where they were earlier in the middle of August. So I've been trying to track not only the case numbers, but also the testing numbers. And that was a story that I did last week, looking at, well, what's going on with coronavirus testing? Because the number of tests that the state is receiving, which is a really important resource, a really important source of data, the number of tests has dropped, and it's dropped considerably since summer. When we look at these, when we look at the graphic and we see these, 2,000 or 3,000 cases per week in July, we were also seeing a real uptick in the number of tests that were being performed. There are upwards of 20,000 tests coming back per week. Well, right now, those test numbers are down in the 10 to 12,000 tests per week range. So a considerable drop off in the amount of data that the state is receiving, that health districts and school districts are receiving, just at the time when school districts are having to make decisions about opening, reopening, staying open. At the time when you need as much data as you can get your hands on, really, the state is receiving less data.
And the governor himself has talked about the need for testing because the data is so important, Kevin, right? And right now, that testing is not up to the standards that the governor and his coronavirus task force would like to see.
Right. And that was one thing that I looked at in the story, going back to the governor's own task force on testing. They were talking about a need for maybe at least 37,000 test results per week, and a number ramping up even higher, in the range of 150,000 tests per week. We are so far away from that. We're far away from 37,000 a week. We've never even come close to that total at any point in this pandemic. So testing has been a challenge in Idaho. It's been a challenge across the country. There's nothing unique to Idaho in this. But I thought it was very important to take a step back and look at the state of testing at this point in time, when school districts are opening or deciding whether to open or deciding whether to remain open. What kind of data are we getting? How much data are we getting? Enough data? Do we know enough? And this is a question I kind of kept going back to with the health officials. Do we know enough at this point?
What's your conclusion on that?
Well, the health officials are saying that the data is still pretty good. And what they're saying is that part of the reason you're seeing the test numbers drop is that there are fewer people who are showing symptoms. One of the big gaps in testing right now, and this is true in the Treasure Valley, is asymptomatic tests, tests for people who are not showing symptoms of coronavirus. It's almost impossible to get a test if you're asymptomatic, unless you're going in for another medical procedure. You can't really just go into a hospital and say, I just want to know, so I want to get a test. So most of the people who get tested in the Treasure Valley are getting tested because they're showing symptoms. And what the state is saying is, well, in the summer here in August and into September, we're seeing fewer people showing symptoms. So we're seeing fewer people wanting to get a coronavirus test. So that is driving down the numbers in the valley and driving down the numbers in the state. Now unfortunately, that's a two-sided coin, because we know we're heading into flu season. And we know that as flu season kicks in, as cold season kicks in, as people are feeling sick of some form or another, they may want to know, well, what is it I have exactly? And is it coronavirus? So the concern going into the fall and winter is that testing capacity that was really being strained in the summer might be strained again. So, I wanted to get a sense of where we are right now, because as I track these numbers daily and as I write about these numbers weekly, the test numbers were really kind of jumping out at me. And I was really kind of, haunted by it, because, you're trying to sit there and you're trying to draw conclusions about what all these numbers mean. Is the situation getting better, or is the situation more or less the same? And I kept kind of going back to a drop in test results coinciding with a drop in case numbers, and trying to get a sense of, well, is the pandemic dissipating at all in Idaho, or are we pretty much where we've been the whole summer? And it kind of depends on how you read the numbers.
And that's so difficult when administrators are trying to make decisions too. I totally get that. One thing you did talk about in your story though, Kevin, was what's happening on Boise State's campus. I think people would love to get an update on what they're seeing with their load, because there was some real worry as colleges were opening up all across the country that we could see a massive spike. What's happening right here locally on the state's biggest campus?
Well, and that's another part of the coronavirus story for us and for all journalists right now, is to just kind of track, when you see a big change in numbers, what exactly does it mean? Now, Boise State is releasing its numbers on a weekly basis, and the numbers that they released on Friday really jumped out at me, because case numbers increased sharply, and so too did the case numbers on campus. I want to say that Boise State had about 42 cases involving students living on campus. So a majority of the cases, here we go. A majority of those cases from last week, 42 of the 77 cases, were involving students who lived on campus. So all of a sudden, Boise State had 42 of its 115 isolation beds in use. Now that's 115 beds, so they're not at capacity yet. They're not even really close to capacity, but that really increased quickly. I mean, the number of students in isolation tripled in 1 week. Well, you can't continue to do that week to week. So what happened with Boise State last week is troubling, because it's not a sustainable trend. And, it comes a couple of weeks into the school year, comes a couple of weeks after the Labor Day mini break, the long weekend on campus. So I don't want to read in too much about what caused it, or what was the origin of the spike in cases, but it's a considerable spike. And, we see this, we're chasing stories of spikes, feels like almost on a daily basis. I spend part of my Monday afternoon on Twitter, because when I did our daily update, we have a map that we update every day with the case numbers. And I saw this huge spike in numbers in Idaho County, which, is, pretty far from us. It's out there in north central Idaho. It's this huge, the largest county in the state in terms of land mass. All of a sudden, their cases doubled in 1 day. And I called the health district and I was like, is that right? Is that did you put in a bad digit or something? I mean, is this an accurate number? And they said, yes, it is. And you need to, they referred me to the Department of Correction. And what we came to find out was you had a big uptick in cases at a correctional facility in Idaho County. accounting for this spike in cases. I want to say that they had about 88 inmates who tested positive in that one correctional facility, and that's in one day. So we see these spikes and how quickly the numbers can change. We talked about Boise State. We saw it up in Idaho County on Monday. Our staff is chasing another possible spike in a school in the Treasure Valley right now. So hopefully, we're hoping to have a story posted here in the near future outlining what's going on there. I don't want to say much more about it and get too far ahead of the piece. This is part of the story, and this is a day-by-day piece of the story for us and for journalists around the state.
We're hearing from a lot of parents, lots of comments saying to open the schools, put kids back in schools. And as school districts, especially in the Treasure Valley, have gone to this hybrid model, many of them, West Ada, Nampa, Caldwell going that direction, Boise schools, even more so, some districts, not just hybrid when I'm talking about an every other day situation, but some school districts now putting out plans, including Boise and West Ada, about starting with bringing back elementary school students on a full-time basis, getting kids back into school. My question to you, Kevin, on all of that, and I'm hearing you parents, there's no doubt, most people would like to have their kids in school if that is a possibility. How do the school districts deal with the ever-changing world that we're living in, where one moment they have one plan, and then how do they pivot, and how fast can they pivot? That has to be a discussion at the school board level.
It has to be, and I kind of wonder, I know that this has to vary from school to school, from district to district, charter school to charter school. I think everybody has their own approach that they're going to take as this year unfolds. And I have to wonder, do some districts and charters, is there a trigger? Is there a number? Is there an infection rate? At which point the school says we have to close or we have to go online only. How many students, how many staffers, and what kind of spread and what sort of concentration. We will watch this. I think every day, every school day between now and the foreseeable future, as long as the pandemic is as prevalent as it is right now. I think this is going to be a daily story. So I can't really answer your question, Michelle, and I don't know if there is a simple answer. I think we're going to be watching every school and every district and watch them chart this course as administrators, as trustees, getting input from parents, getting input from staff. It's going to be an ongoing process.
A huge challenge. Let me bring in just kind of a bunch of comments here. We want to make sure people realize we're listening to you. Shauna says, what's important is our children physically be in school. Crease was saying, my daughter has been loving her distance learning. We'll be continuing with it and homeschooling. So interesting. I wonder if that is a first for them to be homeschooling in that sense. Beth says, open the schools. Nicole is joining us saying, our elementary schools are open. The students are doing so well, especially for having so many months off, I can imagine. Parents are being great about keeping their children home when sick. It is great to be back. Nicole, I don't know what school district you're in, but interesting comment. My kids have too, Helen saying, of course, they miss the social aspect. I'm thinking that she's probably online here, but that can easily be remedied once our COVID numbers are down and we feel safe to be mixing with other kids again. So just back and forth. Mm-hmm. And this is what school districts, this is what parents are dealing with. And we love hearing your comments because they're all true. It is true for every family to make different decisions. It is true, as we say, Kevin, that every school district will have to make different decisions based on their population, their size, what they can and cannot do.
And there's no perfect answer, really, for any school district or any charter. There's no easy solution here.
One of the stories I want to touch on that you did was another enrollment story, as we had followed what would happen as students are thinking about going off to college. And we were talking about this last spring, even, Kevin, here on Making the Grade, about what's going to happen. Will kids stay home? Will kids not go off to college this year? And what we have seen, as you have reported at Idaho Education News and at Idaho News 6, is that enrollment numbers at local colleges are up. And that's true now of Northwest Nazarene University. So this was an interesting take again, yet another school seeing an enrollment increase.
And what's interesting to me about NNU and about College of Idaho, which we wrote about a couple of weeks ago, both are reporting increases in enrollment. And, but they've taken very different approaches academically. NNU is in a face-to-face learning environment. College of Idaho very abruptly went back to an online model. There are students on campus and students return to campus, but they are learning online for fall semester. But both of these colleges, small private colleges, logging an increase in enrollment in this climate, when a lot of colleges are fearing a huge drop-off in enrollment, a double-digit percentage decrease in enrollment, 10%, 15%, 20%. What we're seeing with Northwest Nazarene and College of Idaho are some slight enrollment increases. And it comes at a time, around the country. I was sitting in a higher education reporter seminar for a couple of days last week, and one of the topics that came up, an offshoot of this enrollment question, is the health of small colleges, small private colleges around the country. The fear that there are going to be a number of small colleges, particularly private colleges, that don't survive this downturn, that don't survive this pandemic. What we're seeing right now at Northwest Nazarene and College of Idaho with these enrollment numbers is an encouraging trend that, at least for right now, not only are they avoiding this cratering in enrollment, they're actually, a little bit ahead of where they were a year ago. So some encouraging developments at both of these campuses. And, you mentioned enrollment, at the higher education level. It's kind of a mixed bag. And we'll see the numbers for the state universities probably mid to late October. Boise State, even as Boise State talked, last week about the potential of layoffs, the potential of job cuts, the potential of program cuts, Boise State is still seeing a slight increase in enrollment. College of Western Idaho is seeing a decrease in enrollment, but not the huge decrease in enrollment that we've been fearing for universities and colleges around the country. So right now the numbers are a little bit of a mix, but I keep coming back to, in the spring and into the summer, college administrators, university administrators in Idaho were fearing a big drop-off in enrollment, and that just has not materialized. And in some cases, like Northwest Nazarene, the enrollment has actually increased a little bit.
Were they able to break it down for you, Kevin? Because I know when we had talked about Boise State's enrollment, they were seeing students from out of state coming to Boise State because perhaps where they were originally thinking about going was either shut down or completely online, and students wanted the opportunity to have some hybrid learning, which is happening at Boise State. What about at NNU? Are they seeing more local kids deciding to stay home, or are they seeing out-of-state numbers increase?
It seemed like it was a fairly across-the-board enrollment increase, even though it was slight, both in terms of undergraduate and graduate enrollment. But the Boise State study, too, is really interesting. And when we get those Boise State numbers and when we get the numbers for the other state institutions, I think it's going to be really important to break those numbers down and look at, okay, exactly where did these students come from? Because what Boise State is expecting is an increase in enrollment from out of state. And just like you mentioned, students from California or other states where face-to-face learning is not available, coming to Idaho saying, well, if I want face-to-face learning, I'm just going to have to go to another state to get it. Now, those out-of-state students, they pay more. They pay more in terms of tuition, and they're more likely to live on campus. So they're, from a dollars and cents standpoint, they're valuable to a state-run university or state-run college. So the breakdown of where these students come from is going to be really important to track. The other side of the coin for Boise State is that they said that they've seen a decline in numbers of students coming to BSU from around the state. And that's concerning because it's a sign that, students in Idaho, maybe in rural communities, are fearful of going on to college at this point, fearful of moving to a campus, fearful of relocating. They just don't feel economically like they can afford to go, or their parents don't feel like they can afford to send them to college. So a lot of demographic issues there as well. So, The raw numbers are really interesting. The raw headcount numbers that we're starting to see, they're interesting, but the breakdown, as a numbers person, I like to break down numbers. The breakdown is really going to tell us a lot about the financial health and the sustainability of these colleges and universities.
Well, let's stay on numbers then, shall we? Because I know that you are working on a story that's going to be posted at idahoednews.org here in the next a couple of days, I believe, about numbers in particular when talking K through 12 education, and whether or not how many students have come back to different districts. And there's an early indicator, Kevin, of enrollment numbers and why that's important. So talk to me about emergency levies.
Yes, and this is a topic we've talked about in the past. Emergency levies are a different kind of a school levy in the sense that they're collected at the start of the school year, and they're collected without voter approval. The school board can decide unilaterally. They have the power to collect an emergency levy, and they can only do that if a district has seen an enrollment increase, and they can only do that to offset the cost of increased enrollment. So you can't grab it, as a school board cannot simply impose an emergency levy without cause. They have to show that they've had an enrollment increase, and they have to demonstrate that that enrollment increase has a cost attached to it. Now, some districts in the state that have seen annual growth, year-to-year growth, perennial growth, have been collecting this emergency levy for years. And here we're talking about West Ada, obviously, Bonneville in eastern Idaho, Twin Falls in the Magic Valley. These are districts that have collected an emergency levy every year. None of those three districts are collecting an emergency levy this year. And the reason is they don't think they're going to have an enrollment increase. They may actually have some enrollment decreases. I can only find one school district in the state that is collecting an emergency levy. That doesn't mean there aren't others, but I've checked with a lot, and I've checked with kind of the districts that have collected levies in the past. I can only find Jefferson County in eastern Idaho, a little bit north of Idaho Falls, is collecting an emergency levy this year, and I want to say it's about $850,000. But in past years, we've seen school districts around the state collectively collect a little bit more than $10 million a year in these emergency levies. So a big drop off. And $10 million versus $800,000, that may not be a huge sum of money in the context of what we spend on public schools, but it's a real indication of what's happening or what may be happening in terms of enrollment at the K-12 level. We won't have those numbers for real until October. We won't have those final figures until October, but an early indication that would tell you that parents are deciding to homeschool or maybe send their children to charter schools, virtual charter schools, as opposed to sending their kids back into face-to-face learning in the public schools or virtual options within those public school districts. So, this gives us a sense, a little bit of what's going on, and we'll have better figures in a few weeks.
I'll also be curious to see how they break down the numbers for the virtual schools inside the school districts themselves, because those students are still considered a part of that district. They're just within an own school, and that be the virtual side of things. But those numbers would still go to the total figure of the district itself.
Right. So when a student is enrolled in Boise's version of the online school or West Ada's version of the online school, these are still students within the school district. So they would still be counted towards the school district enrollment. So that's a little bit different variation than enrolling a child in a virtual charter school, which takes that student out of the public school district's numbers and enrolls that student in the charter school. So it's a little bit different part of the equation. But as you mentioned, the online schools and the online options that the school districts are offering, I want to do a shout out to our website and to our Sammy Edge, who wrote a story earlier this week, kind of an update of how things are going for parents in the Boise online school, that online option that I want to say about 4,000 students are enrolled in.
I have heard from many parents that it has its ups and downs, and I think that's what Sammy said in her story as well. So definitely head to idahoednews.org. You can check out that story and many others. Kevin, before I let you go, one more topic I want to just do a quick update on, and if people want to read in depth or if they need the entire backstory, we can send them to your website. But there is an update on the transgender athletics ban that this may see a light of day in court yet again. So really quickly, tell us what happened in this past week that brings this back into the news.
Right. So an appeal has been filed in the past few days. Supporters of this transgender ban, House Bill 500, the very controversial bill that was passed in the 2020 legislative session, this group has filed an appeal going to the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, seeking to have that court overturn a federal judge's injunction blocking the enforcement of this law. So we're heading now into a different appeal. We're heading into a different federal court. The issue still remains whether Idaho can enforce this ban on transgender women and transgender girls from participating in women's and girls' sports. It's the first law of its kind passed in the nation, and as we expected, as we watched this issue unfold during the legislature, the controversy continues, and now it's moved into the federal courts. So we're going to be watching to see if this appeal gets a hearing at the circuit court and what the circuit court decides.
We will continue to watch it, as will you, and we'll bring you the latest updates. Kevin, it is always a pleasure to talk with you, but I do particularly like the end of our Making the Grade segments, because I have to know, since I can't see you in person, what your attire is all the way down to your toes.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's do this. So these are, I know it's fall. It's nice to have some flowers going. So these are kind of a little bit of rose kind of thing going on there.
It's the first day of autumn, my friend, not the first day of spring.
It felt autumny out there this morning too, even. So, but we didn't really have a summer, so we're going to kind of clutch whatever summer we can here for.
I like that.
Until the snow flies, which could be any day now. It's 2020 and it's Idaho.
Kevin, thank you for all the amazing work that you and the entire team at Idaho Education News continue to produce every single day for us. We will be looking for updates. In case people don't have a way to get updates directly to their phone, they can get your app and see when things come about in real time, correct?
Right. So you should download our app because you can get our stories on your phone, get the updates of our stories. Just, check our app anytime you want, and it'll show you our most recent stories first. And you can sign up and you can get alerts when we have breaking news. You'll get an alert on your phone to let you know that we've got something new that you might be interested in. So yes, don't just follow us on your laptop, but do that, please. But also you can follow us by phone, and you can be connected with us 24/7.
And you hinted at it, but in case you're just joining us here on Making the Grade, you may want to do that because it sounds like we may be having a breaking story coming out of Idaho Ed News sometime today. So we'll look for that as well.
We have stories every day, but there are a couple we're chasing that you may want to keep an eye out for.
Kevin, thank you so much for your time. Stay well, wash your hands.
Yes.
Change your socks often, my friend.
Yes.
Thanks for being with us for Making the Grade.